You know what surprises me every summer? I still watch people spend good money on a watermelon and then carry home one that looks beautiful outside but turns out pale watery and almost tasteless. Most people think choosing a sweet watermelon is just luck, but after many years of buying them at markets and roadside stands, I can tell you that luck has very little to do with it. The biggest mistake is trusting only the size or the darkest green color because those things often fool you. I have seen small watermelons sweeter than giant ones, and I have seen perfect-looking fruit with almost no flavor at all. That is why I stopped guessing many years ago. An old fruit seller showed me a few simple signs that cost nothing to use, and ever since then, I rarely bring home a bad watermelon. Today, I want to share those same little secrets with you because they are easy to remember and they really can save your money. If you buy only 1 or 2 watermelons each season, then every mistake feels expensive and disappointing. Nobody wants to cut into a fruit that the whole family has been waiting to enjoy, only to discover it is dry or bland. I have made that mistake myself more times than I like to admit, and that is exactly why I started paying closer attention. The first thing I always do is slow down. Most shoppers grab the first nice-looking watermelon they see because they are in a hurry. I never do that anymore. I look at several fruits before I even touch one. Little differences begin to appear once you stop rushing. Some have marks that tell a story about how they grew, and others quietly reveal that they were picked before they were truly ready. Most people walk right past these clues without noticing them. They are looking with their eyes but not really observing. In the next few minutes, I will show you the first sign that I always check before anything else, because once you understand why it matters, you will never choose a watermelon the same way again. And there's another simple detail that surprises almost everyone the first time they notice it. The first lesson I learned was that the sweetest watermelon almost never announces itself from across the market. Most people chase the biggest one because they believe bigger always means better. I used to think the same way until an older farmer smiled at me and quietly said that a watermelon grows in size long before it finishes building its sweetness. That simple sentence stayed with me for years because I realized I had been paying attention to the wrong thing. Since then, I have watched shoppers fill their carts with the largest fruits they could find, while I kept looking a little longer. Many of them probably went home disappointed without ever knowing why. That is the problem with guessing. You never learn from the mistake because you blame bad luck instead of the signs that were right in front of you. The first thing that catches my attention now is the field spot. Many people ignore it or even avoid it because they think it makes the watermelon look ugly. I do exactly the opposite. That creamy yellow patch tells me where the watermelon rested on the ground while it ripened in the sun. When that spot is pale white, it often means the fruit was picked too early. When it has a rich, creamy yellow color, I become much more interested because it usually means the watermelon had enough time to mature naturally. This is one of those old methods that almost nobody talks about anymore, but it has helped me far more often than any other trick. Of course, it is not the only sign because nature never promises perfection, but it gives you a much better chance than choosing by color alone. I also compare several watermelons before making a decision because once you place them side by side, the differences become much easier to notice. That extra minute can save you from wasting money on fruit that looks attractive, but has very little flavor inside. Most people rush because they think every watermelon is about the same. I have learned that even 2 fruits growing in the same field can taste completely different. There is another small detail that many experienced sellers notice before they even lift the watermelon, and once I understood why they looked for it, I started making far fewer mistakes. That next sign may seem too simple at first, but there is a very good reason why I never skip it now. Many years ago, I watched an older man at a small country market do something that almost made me laugh. He did not ask where the watermelon came from, and he did not care about the bright sign showing the special price. Instead, he walked slowly around each watermelon and gently placed both hands on it as if he was trying to understand something that nobody else could see. I stood there wondering what he was doing because everyone around him was simply grabbing the biggest fruit and moving on. When he noticed me watching, he smiled and told me that the watermelon itself will often tell you how it grew if you are patient enough to look. That day, I learned another simple habit that has stayed with me ever since. I always pay attention to the shape before I even think about putting a watermelon into my cart. I like one that looks even and balanced without strange bumps, deep dents, or uneven sides. A smooth and regular shape usually tells me the fruit developed steadily without major interruptions while it was growing. An oddly shaped watermelon is not always bad, and sometimes it can still taste wonderful. But when I have several choices, I usually trust the one that looks more uniform. It simply gives me more confidence. Then I lift it with both hands. This is another step that many people skip because they do not want to spend a few extra seconds. I always compare two watermelons of about the same size. If one feels noticeably heavier, I almost always choose that one. A heavier watermelon often contains more water and juicy flesh for its size, which is exactly what I want on a hot summer day. It is such an easy comparison that costs nothing, yet very few shoppers actually do it. I remember one afternoon when I ignored this habit because I was in a hurry. The lighter watermelon looked prettier, so I trusted my eyes instead of my hands. When I cut it open that evening, it was dry and disappointing. That small mistake reminded me why old habits are worth keeping. They are simple because they have been tested many times over the years. But there is one more sign that many experienced buyers quietly rely on before making the final choice, and this one involves something you can hear instead of something you can see. That small sound has helped me avoid many disappointing purchases, and I never leave the market without checking it first. Now we come to the sign that people probably talk about more than any other, and that is the sound. Almost everyone has seen someone tapping on a watermelon, but very few people actually know what they are listening for. Years ago, I thought you simply knocked on it and hoped for the best. Then one farmer showed me the difference by placing two watermelons next to each other. They looked almost identical, but when he tapped them gently with his fingers, they sounded completely different. One gave a dull, flat sound that disappeared almost immediately. The other produced a deeper sound with a light vibration that seemed to travel through the whole fruit. He looked at me and said that the watermelon should sound alive, not empty, and not completely muted. I never forgot those words. Since then, I always compare several watermelons instead of tapping only one, because your ears notice the difference much better when you have something to compare. It is not about making a loud noise or hitting the fruit hard. A gentle tap is enough. You are simply trying to notice whether the watermelon responds with a full deep sound instead of a short, lifeless one. Of course, this is not magic, and it should never be the only thing you rely on. I always combine this with the creamy yellow field spot, the balanced shape, and the weight in my hands. When several good signs come together, my confidence becomes much higher. There is another detail that I quietly check while I am already holding the watermelon. I look at the stem. If there is still a small piece attached, I pay close attention to its condition. A stem that is dry and slightly brown often tells me the fruit had time to finish ripening before it was picked. A fresh green stem can sometimes suggest that it was harvested a little too early. Again, this is not a perfect rule, because every farm and every season is different, but it is another clue that costs nothing to use. That is what I like about these old methods. None of them require special tools, and none of them ask you to spend extra money. They simply help you make a better decision by noticing details that most shoppers ignore. But there is one mistake that I still see people make even after checking every one of these signs, and that final mistake can ruin the whole choice if you are not careful. There is one habit that causes more disappointment than almost anything else, and I still see it every summer. People find a watermelon that already looks promising, and then they let someone else choose a different one from the bottom of the pile because they do not want to lift it themselves. I never do that. If I spend my money, I want the exact watermelon that I carefully examined with my own eyes and my own hands. It may seem like a small detail, but I have learned that one watermelon can be very different from another, even when they are sitting right next to each other. I also take a close look at the surface before making my final decision. I do not expect it to be perfect because fruit grows outdoors and small marks are completely normal. What I avoid are deep cuts, soft spots, or cracks that may have happened during transport or handling. Even the sweetest watermelon can lose quality if it has been damaged. Another thing I have noticed over the years is that many people squeeze the watermelon very hard hoping they will somehow feel if it is ripe. I have never found that useful. A good watermelon does not need to be squeezed with force, and doing so can even damage the fruit. Gentle handling tells me much more than rough treatment ever could. I also prefer buying from places where the watermelons are stored carefully instead of being thrown into large piles where they constantly hit one another. A seller who takes care of the fruit often gives me more confidence than a colorful sign promising the lowest price. Sometimes paying a little more for a watermelon that has been handled well is still cheaper than buying a poor one that nobody enjoys eating. Another mistake I often see is choosing only by the darkest green color. Some varieties naturally have lighter stripes, while others are darker from the beginning. That is why I never depend on color alone. I always let several small clues work together instead of trusting a single sign. When the creamy field spot looks right, the shape is even. The fruit feels heavy, the sound is deep, and the stem looks naturally dry. I begin to feel much more confident about my choice. None of these signs alone can promise perfection, but together they greatly improve the chances of bringing home a sweet, juicy watermelon. There is still one final piece that ties all of these simple methods together, and once you understand it, you will probably never look at a watermelon the same way again. After all these years, I can honestly say that buying a good watermelon no longer feels like a gamble. I do not stand in front of a large display hoping that luck will help me. Instead, I slow down for a minute and let a few simple habits guide my choice. They have saved me from wasting money many times, and they have also made summer family meals much more enjoyable. There's something satisfying about cutting open a watermelon and seeing bright red flesh that is juicy, sweet, and full of flavor. It is not because I have some special gift. It is simply because I stopped relying on guesswork. Every season I notice that the people who are happiest with their purchase are usually the ones who take their time instead of rushing. A few extra moments at the market can make a big difference once you get home. I also like sharing these little tricks with friends because they are easy to remember and anyone can use them. You do not need expensive tools and you do not need years of experience. You only need to pay attention to details that most people walk past without noticing. I still remember the smile on one neighbor's face after he tried these methods for the first time. A few days later, he came back and told me that his family kept asking where he had found such a sweet watermelon. He laughed because the only thing that had really changed was the way he chose it. That reminded me once again that old practical knowledge often stays useful for a very long time. The world changes and stores become bigger, but good fruit still leaves the same quiet clues it always has. The more often you look for them, the easier they become to recognize. Before long, you stop thinking about the process because it becomes a natural habit every time you shop. Instead of hoping for a good watermelon, you begin choosing one with much more confidence. And that feeling is worth far more than saving a few dollars because it means fewer disappointments and more enjoyable summer moments with the people you care about. There is still one last thought I always keep in mind whenever I reach for the final watermelon, and that simple idea has become the easiest rule of all because it brings every one of these old signs together in a way that almost never lets me down. When I stand in front of a pile of watermelons today, I never expect to find a perfect one every single time, because nature has always had the final word. What I do know is that these simple old habits give me a much better chance than choosing with my eyes alone or hoping for good luck. I look for the creamy yellow field spot. I compare the weight. I choose a balanced shape. I listen for that deep, full sound. I check the stem if it is still there. Then I take one last slow look before putting it into my cart. None of these steps costs a single dollar, and none of them takes more than a couple of minutes. That is probably why I still use them after so many years. They are simple, practical, and easy to remember. I like methods that anyone can use whether they are buying fruit at a large supermarket, a local market, or a small roadside stand. The best part is that these little habits become easier every season. Before long, you stop thinking about each step because they become part of the way you shop. Even when you do not find the sweetest watermelon every single time, your chances improve enough that the difference becomes obvious. Instead of feeling disappointed after cutting into another pale fruit, you begin enjoying more juicy sweet slices with your family and friends. That feeling alone is worth the extra minute you spend making your choice. I have always believed that many of the best lessons are the simplest ones because they come from people who learned by doing the same thing again and again over many years. Those old growers and market sellers did not have expensive equipment or complicated guides. They trusted careful observation and patient experience. I still believe there is real value in that way of thinking. So, the next time you are standing in front of a mountain of watermelons, do not rush. Give yourself a little extra time and let the fruit tell its own story through the signs we talked about today. You may be surprised how often those quiet details lead you to a sweeter watermelon than luck ever could. And in the next video, I want to share another simple old shopping trick that many people have forgotten, but that can help you choose better fruit every single summer without spending an extra cent.